So here we are, the last subheading of Chapter 38, the end of the Cold War, and we're at the toward an uncertain future. So at the end of the Cold War, the world found itself in a really weird spot. A lot of the world powers were in shambles after World War II. And so the Cold War, or this bipolar world, really kind of shaped everything that happened for the next 40 to 50 years. Things became incredibly interesting, and in the early 90s, once we realized that the United States won and won by a mile. Your book doesn't talk about it, but the Gulf War that happens uses a lot of old Soviet technology, and the United States led coalition just routs them. And so it leads with a lot of really interesting questions. If you have been living your life under this framework for decades, what do you do when that framework disappears? So, with the end of the Cold War, without that second world available to people, the question becomes is like, okay, should NATO still be around? The question is the United States going to be the unbridled leader of the world? And a lot of violence was still throughout this time, but at least before it never really had threatened to get much bigger because it would start to get into Cold War alliances, and then things would just go horrendous from there. And so we're at this point today where Cuba and North Korea and Venezuela at this point are really the only strong classical communist governments. So Cuba and North Korea were really dependent on the help they were getting from other communist countries, and without that, they're really having issues. The other thing is the Soviet Union itself. I was actually living in the Soviet Union just a few years after the events in this chapter. And it was interesting to live there and listen to the people who really were disappointed. I eavesdropped, but I'm not a creeper. I just was on the subway and could speak a little bit of Russian. The anger that some of the people had, they thought that immediately, as soon as they turned to capitalism, they would get their limousine, they would get their Corvettes, they would get their pool, they expected their life to get better, and it doesn't. There's a lot more I can talk about that I don't have time for in this video, but um, the Cold War left the world in kind of an uncertain place, a much better spot than they were after World War II, but still not knowing what the future would hold. We'll talk more about that in chapter 40.